I don't really know how to start this video, so I'm just gonna take the plunge. And it is MS Awareness Week this week in the UK, and I've been meaning to do something related to MS and kind of my experience with it so far, but I haven't really felt strong enough to be able to talk about it until recently, and it's still emotionally really painful to talk about and think about, but I figured why not just do it this week, because it's Raise Awareness Week, you know. Everything started kicking off with me MS wise in July. Prior to it and the summer, I had, honestly, as ironic as it is, felt the best I've ever felt in the whole of my life. I had just moved back home. I was eating a really clean, healthy diet. I was running every other day because it was free and I had no money. I was going to the gym on top of that, and I was working very casually as a waitress or behind the bar at events. So really I was just doing what I wanted to do, and I felt great. I was up here. I felt the healthiest, the strongest I have ever been. I just literally felt on top of the world. But unfortunately for me, that came crashing down. And I turned 22 on the 24th of July, and somewhere between that date and the 30th of July, when I went out to celebrate with my friends, I woke up and thought that I had slept really funny on the left side of my body, because my left arm and left leg felt really heavy. They felt kind of like a dead arm and dead leg, but I ignored it because I thought it was nothing. I really wasn't worried, and I just carried on doing what I wanted to do, and I was kind of noticing that every day it was kind of getting slightly worse. When I was running, this is me running, my right arm was staying up, but my left arm, as I was running, would start to fall down, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And my left leg, where my right leg was placing, it was kind of scuffing along the pavement. It wasn't picking up and placing with my right leg, but I still ignored it, because I thought that as quickly as I woke up and experienced these symptoms, I would wake up again and I would be back to normal. Until it came to one day, I noticed that things had got quite a lot worse. I went for a run and I couldn't control where I was going. So I would start on the pavement, I would start to try to run, and then I would veer off the pavement and I would end up into the middle of the road. And it would happen every time I tried to run. So I'd walk back onto the pavement, start to run again, and I would end up in the middle of the road. So I turned around and called the doctors, and when I called the doctors, that's when I noticed that I was having some other symptoms. It felt like I had burnt my hands and my fingertips. It felt like I had sunburnt my lips, and it felt like I'd taken a sip of a burning hot drink and burnt the tip of my tongue. And when I was on the phone to the receptionist, I was planning what I wanted to say, but what I thought I was going to say versus what actually came out of my mouth was two completely different things. It just wasn't, you couldn't understand what I was saying. It was so slurred and just rubbish. Eventually, I managed to book a doctor's appointment, and then I went upstairs to have a shower, and that's when I noticed that I couldn't lift up my left leg anymore. So I was basically dragging it up the stairs behind me, and then I noticed that it felt like I was drunk. So when I was walking, everything was spinning, like the room was spinning so much, and it was so hard to focus on where I was going. And when I closed my eyes, it just felt like I was on a merry-go-round or something, just spinning round and round. And then I made it to the shower, and my shower is a step up into shower. So I stepped up into the shower, had a sit down shower because I didn't want to break my neck. That's when I noticed that my body and my brain were two different things and they weren't communicating to each other anymore, because I couldn't coordinate myself. I was leaning back against my shower. I couldn't even bring myself up forwards. What I was telling my body just wasn't to do, it just wasn't doing anymore. So I couldn't get out of the shower, basically. It took me about half an hour to get out of the shower, which was great. And then I did something which I would not recommend anyone to do under any circumstances, and that is Googling your symptoms. My symptoms were not really the most pleasant to Google. It was weakness on one side of my body, difficulty talking, can't walk, difficulty with balance, coordination. So obviously it came up with stroke. So I was kind of a bit concerned by this point that I might be having a stroke or had had a stroke or something was going on to do with a stroke. And I made it to the doctors. My doctor was running half an hour late. To take my mind off of things, I started to read the information posters around the waiting room. Stuff like, have you had a cough for 3 weeks or longer? You might want to get that checked out, could be lung cancer, that kind of thing. Until I came across one which had all of my symptoms on, and it was for a brain tumour. So by this point in the doctor's waiting room, I was completely hyperventilating, and I think I was bright red and I was sweating so much out of fear because I thought, oh my God, am I having a stroke? Do I have a brain tumour? The doctor saw me for about 2 minutes and just looked at me and said, you need to go to hospital immediately. Can someone pick you up from here and take you to the hospital right now? I'm going to call ahead to let the hospital know that you're coming in, so they're going to be all ready for you and they'll see you immediately. And so I went into hospital. In A&E, I was put into a side waiting bed kind of thing, and I was seen by neurologist after neurologist after neurologist after consultant after doctor after neurologist, like so many groups of people, and it was becoming quite clear that I was moving up and up and up and up the rankings of the people that I was seeing, and they were just making me do things like touch my nose with my finger, and like obviously my right arm was doing this. I remember thinking, yeah, check me out, I'm passing the test. But my left arm was not cooperating at all, and it was really starting to stiffen up, and I was putting all of my thought and concentration into moving my arm, but I could get it to about there, and then I'd move in with my nose and be like, yeah, look, see, I'm doing it. And in my head, I was looking on my arm and thinking, you're really showing me up here, you're making me look really bad. That was kind of what happened until a doctor came and said to me, we really need to do an MRI brain scan on you. It's quite late in the day now, so we'll try and get one done today, but if we can't get one done today, then we'll have to do one first thing in the morning and you'll have to stay overnight. I remember saying to my dad, I can't stay in hospital overnight, so I really, really hope that they can get an MRI done today, because I cannot stay in hospital overnight. I am not strong enough. I really just can't do it. That would absolutely terrify me. So obviously I had to stay in hospital overnight. And poor me, I didn't realise that I would be in hospital from that point for 6 weeks. 6 weeks in hospital. And it was the absolute worst 6 weeks of my life. The ward that I was put on first was an A&E ward, and it's where they put people while they wait for a bed to become available in the ward relevant to them. All of the women that were on the same ward as me were all elderly women who, a lot of them were very, very distressed, and they didn't know why they were there, what had happened to them, where they were, and were just very, very confused. A lot of them had lost control over certain bodily functions, so it smelled. It just really, really wasn't a very pleasant environment to be in, because there was a lot of noise. There was a lot of screaming and crying all through the night, and it was just really, really was so sad and so horrible to be there. So I stayed in hospital on the first night, and I really didn't expect I'd have to stay in hospital. So I didn't have anything with me. I didn't have any sleep whatsoever. So by the time the morning came, I was a complete and utter mess, an emotional wreck, very vulnerable person. I felt extremely vulnerable and extremely terrified. And I've seen an MRI brain scanner before, and I know how they work. You see the huge machine and the tiny tube that you've got to go in. It is so terrifying. What's another word I can use? Daunting. It's very in your face. I was a complete and utter mess. I felt terrified. Like my whole body was shaking because I was just beyond scared. And I remember saying to the radiographer, oh, how long do you think this is going to last? And I remember thinking, maybe I can last about 10 minutes. I think 10 minutes is probably my maximum. And he said, half an hour? So I thought, okay, I'm going to die in this machine. And I got put in the machine, and it was awful. I just remember it, but it's such a loud machine, and it's got so many bangs and weird noises, and it's dark, and it's so claustrophobic. It's literally like around you and you can't move, and I was cold and I was terrified, and it was just not that great. And he pulled me out of the machine a lot earlier than I was expecting, so I thought, yes, thank God that's over. I never ever want to go in one of those horrific machines ever again. And then I saw that he had a needle in his hand, and I just thought, oh God, here we go. And he asked me questions like, have you ever had an epileptic fit? Are you allergic to this? Are you allergic to this? Has this happened to you? Blah, 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 blah. And I said, no. And then he injected me and he said, this is to see if your brain is bleeding. And then he put me back in the machine. By which point, I didn't think it could get any worse. So I had a massive panic attack and I cried so much. Tears were rolling down my eyes into my ears, and my hair was getting soaked because I was crying, and all I could think about was how much I wanted to get out of the machine and just run away, but I couldn't even walk anymore, and it was just awful. And then I had all of these thoughts like, oh my God, do I have epilepsy? Is my brain bleeding? Why is he injecting me with things that's going to dye my brain different colours? Like, this is awful. Like, I really don't enjoy this. I don't like it. And then I just thought, if you're gonna die in this machine, you might as well die calmly. So I just calmed down like that. And that's when I noticed that they basically put a frame around your head with mirrors on. And if I tilted my head up and looked behind me, I had mirrors on the front where I could look backwards behind me out of the machine into the room where all the radiographers were looking at the images from inside my head, which I probably shouldn't have done because I didn't like what I saw, because what I saw, to my horror, was a computer screen, someone scrolling through all the pictures from inside my head, and about 5 people crowded around the computer, and there was a couple of people and they'd be pointing at something, and then they would discuss it and agree, and they'd point at something else. So at that point, when I saw that, my stomach dropped, and I just thought, you're not getting out of this one. They've found something in your head. I mean, they were looking at pictures of inside my head, and it was the weirdest, most horrible thing. And yeah, I just thought they've clearly found something that's quite serious. And then I thought, it must be the brain tumour. And I honestly remember thinking, I really hope it's a benign tumour. How am I going to tell all my friends that I've got a brain tumour? And am I going to have brain surgery? And I was taken back to my bed eventually after the test was over. And I just remember just wanting to like hold myself, and I was feeling extremely fragile. But then a consultant came and told me that, you know, it wasn't a brain tumour. They had found some fluid in my brain and in my spine, which was caused by inflammation, and they needed to test the fluid to see that it wasn't being caused by an infection, and they were going to do that through a procedure called a lumbar puncture. A lumbar puncture is the same sort of thing as an epidural, where they put a needle into your spine, but they take out some of the fluid that was around my brain and in my spine, and they would test it. So that was the next really terrifying test that I had done. I had to lie in the fetal position on my hospital bed with my spine out, so I couldn't see what was going on. And he said, I'm going to give you some anaesthetic. If you're uncomfortable or you have any pain, let me know and I will adjust the levels. And I don't really know what went wrong with the procedure, but the pain was excruciating. I don't know whether he didn't put enough anaesthetic in or whether he went in the wrong place and jabbed something, but it sent the most intense, like sparkler, burning electric shocks up and down my right leg and up and down my right leg. But then he put some more anaesthetic in and I couldn't feel anything. So those were the two tests that I had done, along with about 1 million blood tests. And eventually doctors came and told me that the brain scan showed that I had lesions in my brain and in my spine, which are basically like scars, and that I had inflammation in my brain and in my spine, and that was what was causing the issues with my arm and my leg. And what that's called is clinically isolated syndrome, which in medical terms is basically like a one-off, and I could go through the whole of my life and it will stay as clinically isolated syndrome, or if I have another attack like this, it most likely will be multiple sclerosis. I can't speak. But don't Google anything, don't look anything up. There's a lot of stuff online that isn't correct, and there's a lot of stuff that might scare you, so just focus on it being clinically isolated syndrome and just listen to the medical professionals. Don't be doing your own research. So that was it. And whilst I was in hospital, within a couple of days I had deteriorated really, really dramatically and was basically paralysed in my left arm and my left leg. So my left arm, my thumb was in like that, and then my fingers were clenched around it in a fist, and then it was tight to my body like that, and I couldn't move it. And my leg, I couldn't walk and I couldn't move that either. So I couldn't do anything for myself. I had to be wheeled about in a wheelchair. I had to be taken to the toilet. I couldn't wash myself, so I had to be washed, dried and dressed by nurses. I could just about feed myself, so I mean there was that, thank God. But it did affect my right side as well a little bit. I couldn't write, I couldn't put makeup on, I couldn't do the finer motor stuff I really, really struggled with. My arm was so locked like that. It was so bad that the physios that I was working with were really concerned that I wouldn't get full range of movement back, but I did. And it's like the weirdest thing, like imagine you're staring at your hand and you're putting 110% of your concentration into just wiggling your fingers and you just can't move it. But yeah, I stayed in hospital for 6 weeks. I was given really, really strong steroids for 2 weeks, and then I started to see improvement, so I could start to wiggle my fingers again. After I finished the course of steroids, I was just in hospital to have physio, and I got moved after 3 weeks to a specialist rehabilitation hospital, which was completely horrific, and I was in there for 3 weeks, and that's where I really lost myself. I couldn't look in the mirror anymore because I couldn't look at myself. I didn't watch any TV, I didn't really read anything. I honestly just stared at the walls because all I could think about was how much I hated it in there and just wanted to escape. But that's a whole different other story. And I did get out of there, and the day after I got out of hospital, I went for an appointment with a leading consultant specialising in MS. So I'd probably should have seen what was going to happen, but considering how bad I was to how much I improved in 6 weeks, I had got to the point where I thought it's clearly just clinically isolated syndrome, like it can't be MS, like look how much I've improved in the period of time that I've had. Well, he didn't tell me and diagnose me and say, you have MS, because he didn't really have to. What he did was he showed me my brain scans and said, anything that's white on the brain scan shouldn't be there. And then when he turned the screen around and I saw the image, it honestly scarred me so much, and I didn't sleep for 2 weeks because every time I closed my eyes I saw the picture, and I don't think I'll ever forget seeing that, because when he turned it around, it wasn't just like a little bit of white. There was fat white splodges all across one side of my brain, and some ones on the other side of my brain too, but huge like golf balls of white in my brain, which is scars, so it's brain damage basically. So that was the first thing that scarred me. The second thing was he then said, we need to start you on medication as soon as possible, and we're not messing around, we need to start you on the strongest stuff. It's the strongest stuff and it comes with the worst side effects, so that's something to consider, but you're going to start it as soon as possible and you're going to be on it for the foreseeable future. And I'm kind of an annoying person where I don't even like taking a paracetamol when I have a headache. So to be told that I was going to be on medication for the rest of my life was just the worst news imaginable. And after the brain scan, after he told me that, it's like my brain checked out and it said, whoa, this is too much for you to deal with. You've just been through 6 horrific weeks and now you've got this. So I'm gone. I'm going to come back and we can deal with this when you're ready. And it's honestly taken me until March to start to be able to deal with all of the emotions and everything that's happened, because it was just like emotional hit after hit after hit. And when I came out of hospital, I thought I had closed the chapter of that nightmare of being in hospital, and I thought it was done. But then I went for that appointment and it was like the chapter reopened. It's like Nightmare version 2 extended edition. So I don't really remember what else he said to me after that, because I remember looking at him and he was talking to me and I checked out, and I just remember looking at him and thinking, I don't know what you're saying to me because I can't hear what you're saying. But I was nodding to him. I was like, yeah, what? I don't know what you're saying to me anymore because I can't, it's too much. I held it together. I held it together all the way through the waiting room, back to the receptionist, and I talked to her and made an appointment with her and whatever, and I was fine, I had this smile on my face, like everything's okay. And then I held it together until the reception doors closed and just so many tears. I cried. We were like the other end of the hospital. I cried all the way through the hospital, hysterically. I cried all the way through the car park, all the way to the car, all the way home, cried all the way up to my bedroom, and then I just locked myself in my bedroom and just cried and cried and cried and cried. So I have been diagnosed with sudden onset, highly active or aggressive, relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, and yeah, that's how I got diagnosed. That's what happened. I have also had 1 course of treatment. I am on a disease modifying therapy called Lemtrada, and considering I had aggressive onset, I have had no other problems with MS, and in the meeting with the consultant he said I'd be looking at 2 to 3 attacks in the first year, and I mean, touch wood, I've had nothing yet, and I really hope that I have nothing else. I So yeah, that's basically what happened. I think that is gonna conclude this ramble. I don't really know if it makes any sense, and I really feel like I've been talking forever. Yeah, I have. I think I'm gonna make a video about MS and what it actually is, and explain the words like lesions and inflammation and multiple sclerosis and relapsing remitting and all of these words which I didn't even know what they meant when I got diagnosed. As it's MS Awareness Week, that's what I'm doing. I'm gonna raise awareness.